Imagine inventing a medicine that saves millions of lives and then selling the patent for just $1. That's exactly what happened with insulin. Discovered just over 100 years ago, it was meant to be a treatment available to all. Yet fast forward to today, and in the United States, millions of diabetics are paying hundreds of dollars for a single vial. How did we get here? This is the insulin price scandal. Why diabetics pay so much, and what's finally being done about it. In 1921, Canadian researchers Frederick Banting and Charles Best, working at the University of Toronto, made a breakthrough that would change medicine forever. At that time, a diagnosis of type 1 diabetes was essentially a death sentence. Patients, often children, wasted away within months because their bodies could no longer produce insulin. Within a year of its discovery, insulin was being used in hospitals and saving lives around the world. The scientists famously sold the patent to the University of Toronto for just $1 Canadian. Banting explained his reasoning in a now famous quote, "Insulin does not belong to me, it belongs to the world." His vision was simple. Insulin should be accessible to everyone who needed it. It was never meant to be a billion-dollar business. Think about that for a moment. A life-saving discovery, sold for less than the cost of a cup of coffee today. The scientists wanted it shared freely, not turned into a profit machine. That contrast makes what happened next all the more shocking. So, how did something that began as a gift to the world turn into a scandal? To understand that, we need to compare the US with the rest of the world. So, how does the US compare? Here's the shocking truth. The exact same vial of insulin that costs about $30 in Canada can cost $300 or more in the United States. A 2020 Rand Corporation study found that the average US insulin price was about $98 per unit, more than 10 times higher than in 32 other wealthy countries studied. And this isn't because the insulin in the US is newer or more effective. In fact, many of the most widely prescribed insulins are decades old. The difference isn't in the medicine, it's in the system. Americans aren't paying for better insulin, they're paying for a system that doesn't regulate drug prices the way most of the world does. Other nations either negotiate directly with manufacturers or set national price caps to keep life-saving drugs affordable. But in the US, drug companies are largely free to set their own list prices, with little restriction. That's why Americans consistently pay the highest insulin prices in the world. And at the center of that system are three companies that dominate the global insulin market. Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi control about 90% of the global insulin supply. Over the past 2 decades, the prices of their insulin products have steadily climbed, even though the actual cost of producing a vial of insulin is estimated at less than $10. One strategy they've relied on is called evergreening. By making slight changes, reformulating insulin, altering delivery pens, or adjusting packaging, they can extend patent protections. This blocks lower-cost generics and biosimilars from entering the market, even when the original formulas are decades old. Companies argue this is about innovation and giving patients more options, but critics point out that many of these changes are incremental and don't justify the sharp increases in price. Between 2002 and 2013, the price of insulin in the US nearly tripled. For patients, that's meant not more choices, but higher bills, and sometimes impossible choices between insulin and other basic needs. But the manufacturers aren't the only players driving up the price. There's another middleman in the mix. In the US, most patients don't buy insulin directly from the companies that make it. Instead, prices are filtered through pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, the middlemen who negotiate with manufacturers on behalf of insurance companies. On paper, PBMs are supposed to lower costs by negotiating rebates, essentially discounts, from manufacturers. But according to the Congressional Research Service, 2019, and the Kaiser Family Foundation, 2021, those rebates usually don't lower the price a patient pays at the pharmacy counter. Instead, they're typically passed along to insurers, who may use them to reduce overall premiums rather than lowering insulin copays directly. The system is complicated, and that complexity often benefits companies, not patients. Even when rebates exist, the people who rely on insulin still face the highest prices. That's why a vial of insulin with a list price of $300 can still leave a patient paying hundreds out of pocket. especially if they're uninsured or underinsured. The lack of transparency means that while money moves between manufacturers, PBMs, and insurers, the burden still falls hardest on patients. And while the system seems complicated on paper, the human cost is heartbreakingly simple. For some, the price of insulin isn't just unfair, it's deadly. For people with type 1 diabetes, insulin isn't optional, it's life support. And yet, according to a 2019 study published in JAMA Internal Medicine, about 1 in 4 US patients have rationed insulin at some point due to cost. Rationing often means skipping doses, using less than prescribed, or going without insulin for days at a time. And the consequences can be immediate. Patients have ended up in emergency rooms with diabetic ketoacidosis, a life-threatening condition that develops when the body doesn't have enough insulin. Some have tragically lost their lives. Other research confirms the scale of the crisis. A 2022 Yale study estimated that nearly 1.3 million Americans ration insulin each year. Think about that. In one of the richest countries in the world, people are dying not because we don't have the medicine, but because they can't afford it. These are preventable deaths. Families have shared heartbreaking stories of young adults who died after trying to stretch their insulin supply. For advocates, these tragedies are the clearest evidence that the US insulin market isn't just flawed, it's broken. After years of outrage, change is finally happening, but it's only the beginning. There has been progress. In 2023, the US government capped insulin costs at $35 a month for Medicare patients under the Inflation Reduction Act. Several states, including Colorado and Illinois, have also passed laws capping insulin prices for people with private insurance. Public pressure has pushed drug makers to respond too. Eli Lilly announced in 2023 that it would cut the price of its most commonly prescribed insulin by 70% and expand its affordability programs. Novo Nordisk and Sanofi soon followed with similar pledges. These changes matter. For many patients, a $35 monthly cap can mean the difference between rationing insulin and taking it as prescribed. But millions of Americans are still uninsured. And for them, the list price remains a crushing burden. Until there's full transparency in pricing and broader reforms, patients remain vulnerable. For many advocates, the fight for affordable insulin is far from over. The insulin story began with scientists who wanted to share a life-saving discovery with humanity. A century later, the fact that people still die in the richest country on Earth because they can't afford insulin is not just a scandal, it's a call to action. Insulin was never meant to be a luxury. It was meant for everyone. And we need to keep pushing until that original vision becomes reality. If you believe insulin should be affordable, give this video a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear the truth. You can also support our channel through our merch or by using the Super Thanks button below. And if you'd like to learn about natural ways to support healthy blood sugar, check out our video right here. Thanks for watching. Stay strong, stay informed, and take care of yourself.